was 84 years old. His family confirmed the news in a statement on Facebook, saying they have lost, quote, a remarkable and loving husband, father, grandfather, and great American.
The Powell family says he was fully vaccinated. They thank the staff at Walter Reed National Medical Center for their caring treatment. Powell served in multiple Republican administrations, shaping American foreign policy over the last 20 years, while also marking a number of firsts. CNN's Wolf Blitzer honors his lifetime of service.
I will never not be a soldier.
Colin Powell, a soldier turned statesman, made history on many fronts. The first African-American and youngest chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and later, the first African-American Secretary of State.
So I've always felt strongly that you should try to solve conflicts in this world through negotiations, through diplomacy. Anytime we can solve the problem that way and not use force and satisfy our objectives, let's push for that.
Powell grew up in the Bronx, New York. His parents emigrated from Jamaica. By his own admission, he was not an outstanding student.
It's been amusing over the years to have people come up to me and say, well, General Powell, you're chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When did you graduate from West Point? Couldn't have gotten in.
He enrolled in the City College of New York. Geology was his major, but the ROTC became his passion. Powell flourished as a cadet, and after graduating, excelled as a soldier. He served 2 tours of Vietnam before earning a prestigious fellowship working for the Office of Management and Budget during the Nixon era in 1972. Afterwards, Powell returned to his troops, eventually becoming a general, and went back to the White House in 1987 as President Reagan's national security advisor. Then, in 1989, the general became the highest-ranking officer in the U.S. military when President George H.W. Bush named him chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it. How long have you been at it?
Powell became a household name during the first Gulf War. His policy of overwhelming force against Iraq became known as the Powell Doctrine.
I express my sincere thanks to each and every one of you for being here to share my final day in uniform.
After a distinguished 35-year career, Powell retired from the Army in 1993. 10 years later, the United States would become involved in another Gulf War, and Powell again played a key role.
My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
Then Secretary of State Powell made a case in front of the UN Security Council, arguing that Iraq posed a grave threat to the world because, he said, they had weapons of mass destruction. The following month, the U.S. invasion began. The war lasted more than 8 years. No weapons of mass destruction ever turned up.
I regret it now because the information was wrong.
After 4 years as President George W. Bush's Secretary of State, Powell returned to private life. He spent his civilian years empowering youth through his projects, America's Promise Alliance and the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership.
We're going to go and educate the kids who are most in need. And when I heard their stories, I said, this is where I belong. I'm home again.
General Colin Powell, a leader and a patriot, who devoted a lifetime to service.
And Wolf Blitzer joins us now. Wolf, that lifetime dedicated to service and what he got out of it too in terms of his leadership style, not just in the military, but what he brought with him to the government and even after. That is such a key part, I think, of what people are looking at this morning.
You know, it's so true, Erica, because, he did devote his whole life to serving our country before he joined the military, after he was in the military, and certainly as elsewhere in the U.S. government when he was Secretary of State and in the private sector ever since. He just wanted to help people. And whenever I would meet with him, and we would meet occasionally, we'd have dinner once in a while, he would remind me of his roots growing up, a kid who was the son of immigrants, growing up in the Bronx and with not much. He was always so appreciative of what the United States of America enabled his family to do, his country to do, enabled him to do. And he would always say, sort of like, my parents would always say, only in America could something like this happen. And it was always so meaningful to me to hear that coming from someone who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a retired four-star general, someone who was later Secretary of State. And, it was just a true American, a true world leader who commanded such great respect. So that's why this is a really sad day for all of us who got to know him over the years.
Well, Wolf, his life, his career was a demonstration of progress, racial progress. General Mark Hertling, of course, commanded forces in Iraq following the invasion. He made this note this morning, which I thought was quite telling. He said he went from being unable to get base housing in Fort Benning to becoming the first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and, of course, first African-American Secretary of State. I mean, that is a remarkable lifespan. He could not, because of his race, get housing at the start of his career and then went on to become, to go to the very top.
And he always spoke of that. He always reminded me of that when we would talk. He would always say, look at how far we've come. But then he would go on to say, we still have a long way to go. We're not a perfect country yet. We're not a perfect society. There's still racism in our country, and there's still all sorts of other problems. But he would always be very proud of the achievements that he did and the inspiration that he did.
Hold your thought for a moment. This is the current Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin speaking about Powell right now. Let's have a listen.
Our Powell family. The world lost one of the greatest leaders that we have ever witnessed. Alma lost a great husband, and the family lost a tremendous father. And I lost a tremendous personal friend and mentor. He has been my mentor for a number of years. He always made time for me, and I could always go to him with tough issues. He always had great counsel. We will certainly miss him. I feel as if I have a hole in my heart just learning of this just recently. First African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs. First African-American Secretary of State. A man who was respected around the globe and will be, quite frankly, it is not possible to replace a Colin Powell. We will miss him. Again, my thoughts and prayers go out to the family, and we're deeply, deeply saddened to learn of this. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right, let's load up, guys.
Current Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin there speaking about the loss, the hole in his heart, he said, following the passing of Colin Powell. I want to go back to Wolf Blitzer. Wolf, I'm sure you heard Austin there, but you were speaking about that particular part of Powell's legacy, which is his own discussion of racial progress in the U.S. military and more broadly during his own career.
And he was so proud of the fact that the United States Army was really a leader in integration, in making sure that everyone who volunteered to serve in the U.S. Army, whatever their background, whatever their race, would have great opportunities. And look at the opportunities that he had, and he took advantage of those opportunities, and he rose to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, that's obviously at the highest of levels. But he was always talking about the Army specifically, even more so than the Air Force or the Marine Corps or the Navy. It was the Army, he would always say to me, that really inspired so many young volunteers, African-American volunteers, to get in there because they knew they would have a great opportunity. They knew that, they would not be discriminated against. I'm sure there was some discrimination, but that there were great opportunities in that branch of the U.S. military. And he always spoke about that, and he was so proud of the fact that the Army was so special in dealing with all those issues. And I saw it firsthand, by the way, during my years as CNN's Pentagon correspondent, during the build-up, the lead-up to the war, the Operation Desert Storm, the Operation Desert Shield was in the months leading up to it. And what he did really was so impressive. He had, as I noted in the piece, the Powell Doctrine, which was going to be overwhelming force. And a lot of folks forget that in order to liberate Kuwait, and Saddam Hussein had invaded and occupied, took over Kuwait, and potentially could have moved in to Saudi Arabia. That was the great U.S. fear that those oil those oil fields in Saudi Arabia were going to come under the control of the Iraqis. He always said, we're going to use overwhelming force, and the U.S. and its allies deployed 540,000 troops to Saudi Arabia, 6 aircraft carrier, battle groups that were deployed to the Persian Gulf. And when they went in to liberate Kuwait, it was 6 weeks, 4 weeks of an air war, 2 weeks of a ground war. Kuwait was liberated, and then the U.S. got out. He always said we have to have an exit strategy. You got to have overwhelming force, get it done, but then you have to have a plan to get out. And the U.S. got out fairly quickly, and it was just part of the Coleman Doctrine that inspired all of that, and it was just a memory I'll never forget as a reporter who was covering it.
Something else we just heard from Defense Secretary Austin that stood out to me, Wolf, is he mentioned the personal loss for him and talked about how Colin Powell, he said, always made time for me. I could go to him with tough issues. He always had great counsel. That, too, is something I feel like we're seeing on social media, the fact that he would make time and that he was there for so many people as a mentor, as a friend.
Colin Powell not only made time for the men and women in the U.S. military and inspired them and worked with them and helped them, mentored them, and all of that. He made time for almost everyone. I mean, he made time for me over the years. Whenever I would call him and say, can we talk? Can we have dinner? I just need some background, some help. He would always say, of course. And we developed over the years, a very close relationship that helped me tremendously in my journalistic career, but also helped me better explain to our viewers here in the U.S. and around the world what was really going on, because he had that experience, that background that helped me better appreciate the good and the bad of what was going on. And he was always very blunt, very honest. Would acknowledge mistakes when they were made and say we got to learn from those mistakes and make sure we don't repeat those mistakes. But he was just a wonderful human being, and I have to say, such a wonderful, loving family. My heart goes out to Alma, to the kids, to the whole family. And as we say, I just want him to rest in peace and may his memory be a blessing.
Yeah, these are, of course, national losses, but they are, at the core, personal losses to his family. Wolf Blitzer, thanks so much for sharing your own personal experience of the late Secretary of State. Joining us now is Aaron David Miller. He advised